All right, let's dive into Organigram Holdings Inc. OGI on the stock market.
Yeah.
We're going to see if it's an investment you might want to think about. You've probably heard about them going from like this tiny Canadian cannabis company to a real market leader, right?
Yeah.
And there's even talk of a partnership with some big global player kind of out of left field.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild story, and we've got a ton of analysis here. We'll break it all down so you can decide for yourself if it's a good move.
Okay, cool. So, like, back to basics. How did Organigram even start? Were they really, like, total newbies?
Pretty much, yeah. Back in 2013, they were this small medical cannabis provider just operating out of Moncton, New Brunswick, small town stuff. And get this, from those humble beginnings, they actually went public on NASDAQ in 2019.
No way.
Yeah, and by late 2024, they had become the biggest Canadian cannabis company by market share. That's not just growth, that's like total domination.
Wow. From small-town Canada to Wall Street and dominating the market, that's something else. But I'm guessing it wasn't all easy, right? Did they just, like, grow naturally, or was there more to it?
Yeah. Well, they did a bit of both, actually. They expanded organically, but they also made some, like, really smart acquisitions along the way. That's how they were able to get so big, so fast, and, break into new parts of the market.
Acquisitions. So they weren't just, like, planting more seeds. They were buying up the competition. Makes me think of those old Monopoly games, buying up all the property.
Yeah, exactly. They were strategic about it, though. Like, take their acquisition of the Edibles and Infusions Corp back in 2021. That wasn't just them getting into edibles. It was about, like, getting into this whole trend of alternative ways to use cannabis, right? More and more people, especially newer users, they're looking for stuff that's discreet, easy to use, and doesn't involve smoking.
Ah, so they were thinking ahead, kind of predicting how people would want to use cannabis. Clever. But edibles aren't exactly known for having huge profit margins, right?
True, but that's where their acquisition of Laurentian Organic comes in, also in 2021. They were known for their premium craft cannabis, like the really good stuff, especially their hashish, the Afghan-style hash, which, commands a higher price.
Right, so they're playing both sides. Affordable edibles for the everyday user, and then the high-end craft cannabis for the, what do you call them, the cannabis connoisseurs.
Exactly. But you mentioned their biggest move, right? Acquiring Motif Labs in 2024. That one was really something.
Yeah, that's the one that stood out to me. Motif Labs had that huge extraction and processing center, right?
Right.
What made that acquisition so important?
Motif Labs brought something crucial: the ability to extract and process at a massive scale. Game changer. It allowed Organigram to produce, all those high-margin products you mentioned, like vapes and edibles, but on a huge scale. Remember, these products are where the real money is in the cannabis world. That's where the growth is.
So it wasn't just about growing more weed. It was about turning that weed into more profitable products.
Smart. I'm noticing a theme here. Organigram seems really good at, like, not putting all their eggs in one basket.
You got it. They've created a real house of brands, each one aimed at a specific type of customer. It helps them get a bigger piece of the market and, reduces their risk if one thing doesn't work out.
Okay, let's talk about these brands. I'm picturing, like, a whole cannabis department store. What are some of the big ones?
So for the premium market, you have Edison. They're known for high-quality, indoor-grown flower and pre-rolls. Think of it as the craft beer of weed. Then there's SHRD, their value-focused brand. Pre-milled flower, pre-rolls, all at really good prices.
So something for every budget? Cool. What about people who don't want to smoke or vape?
Got that covered too. They have Majure for edibles with their super popular THC-infused gummies and stuff like that. And then for the vapors, there's BOXHOT, known for their high-potency vape products. Wow, they're not messing around. They've got the whole cannabis experience covered. This all sounds very Canadian, though. What about their global goals? Are they happy just being the kings of Canada?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. They partnered up with British American Tobacco Back, a global giant.
Wait, BAT, like the cigarette people. That's unexpected.
Might seem strange, but it's actually a really smart move for both of them. BAT initially took a 20% stake in Organigram back in 2021, and they just kept investing more and more. They now have about 30% of the voting shares and a huge 45% of the economic equity in Organigram.
So BAT is really going all in on Organigram. And it's not just about the money, right?
Yeah.
What else does BAT bring?
This is the good stuff. BAT
Hmm.
has tons of experience in research and development. They understand consumers globally, and they have the potential to get Organigram's products everywhere. They have a massive network and really know how to work in regulated markets. That's super valuable for a cannabis company that wants to go beyond Canada.
It's like BD is giving them the keys to the world. But Kellen, there's got to be some downsides to working with big tobacco, right?
Sure, some investors might be a little hesitant about B being involved, but you got to remember, BAT is a publicly traded company. They have to answer to their shareholders. They're not going to risk their reputation by doing anything shady.
Okay, that's fair. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about their financials. All this branding and diversifying is great, but are they actually making money?
That's the question, right? Let's look at the numbers.
Give me the highlights. Are they rolling in cash or are they drowning in debt?
You'll be happy to hear that Organigram has one of the strongest balance sheets in the entire Canadian cannabis industry. They have over 100 million Canadian dollars in cash and basically no debt.
Hold on, over 100 million in cash and no debt? That's unheard of, especially in such a new industry. How'd they pull that off?
It shows how careful they've been with their money and how focused they are on high-margin products. They didn't fall into that trap of overspending and growing too quickly. A lot of early cannabis companies did that, and it hurt them.
So they're being responsible, but still ambitious, impressive. What about their revenue, their actual profits?
Uh-huh.
Are they in the black?
Their revenue has been steadily going up, hit 161.6 million Canadian dollars in FY 2023. But the cannabis industry is kind of unpredictable, right? So they did see a little dip in FY 2024, ended up around 159.8 million. But here's the important part. Their recreational sales actually went up year over year. That means they're taking more of the market.
Okay, so they're holding their own in a tough market.
Yeah.
But the real question, profit.
This is where it gets tricky. They're not consistently profitable yet. Big reason for that is those darn excise taxes that the Canadian government puts on cannabis. In FY 2023, they paid a whopping 72 million Canadian dollars in excise taxes.
Ouch, that's gotta hurt. Are they at least moving in the right direction? Is there hope?
Absolutely. They've had positive adjusted EBITDA for quite a few quarters in a row. Means their core business is making money. In FY 2023, their adjusted EBITDA was 6 million Canadian dollars. Way better than the year before.
Okay, maybe a quick explanation here. What exactly is adjusted EBITDA and why should I care?
Think of adjusted EBITDA like this. It's a way to see how profitable a company really is, but without all the one-time expenses and weird accounting stuff. It gives investors a better idea of how much money the company can actually make.
Ah, so it's like seeing past the smoke and mirrors to their real earning power. So even though they're not always profitable, the signs are good, they're heading in the right direction. But what about those impairment charges? They sound kind of scary. Can you explain those in plain English?
Imagine you buy this really fancy piece of equipment for your business, top of the line. Then suddenly the market changes and your fancy equipment is useless. You got to lower the value of that equipment on your books. That's an impairment charge. Basically admitting you paid too much for something or it's not worth as much anymore.
Ouch. Like buying the newest phone and then a better one comes out a month later. But it sounds like Organigram is doing things to minimize those risks and improve their overall profitability, right?
Yeah, they're really focused on keeping production costs down, selling more of those high-margin products like vapes and edibles, and just making their operations more efficient.
So they're being smart, not just throwing money at the problem. Okay, this is painting a pretty good picture of Organigram. But let's be real, there are always risks, right? What are the potential red flags that investors should keep in mind?
You're right. Every investment has its risks, and cannabis is no exception. It's still a pretty young and volatile industry.
Okay, let's hear it. What are the potential dangers?
Well, first off, the cannabis world is still pretty new, so things change fast. Competition is fierce, regulations can change overnight, and then there's the illegal market, which is always a problem.
So it's definitely not a risk-free investment. Are there any risks specific to Organigram that we should be watching out for?
Even though their finances look great, consistent profits aren't a guarantee. Things happen, like more asset write-downs or profit margins get squeezed. That could delay them actually hitting net income.
Okay, so profitability is still a bit of a question mark.
Yeah.
What about the risk of them issuing more shares and diluting existing shares? They've done a lot of acquisitions and they seem to have big plans. Could that mean they'll need to issue more shares, which would, decrease the value of the existing shares?
That's a legitimate concern, yeah. Acquisitions and expansions, they need money. One way to raise that money is by issuing more shares, but that can dilute the ownership percentage of the people who already own shares. it could affect their investment.
Got it. Something to keep an eye on for sure. Are there any other hidden risks lurking in the shadows that we should be aware of?
Well, regulations and legal stuff are always a concern in cannabis, right? Canada's taxes on cannabis, the rules about marketing, and even limits on certain products, all of that can affect their profits and how much they can grow. And then there's always the risk of their licenses getting suspended, or maybe they have some compliance issue. Remember that pesticide thing they had a while back?
Yeah, the pesticide incident. It just goes to show even the best companies can mess up, and sometimes those mistakes have big consequences.
For sure. It reminds us how important quality control is, making sure they follow the rules and being open and honest about everything they do.
So yeah, there are risks to think about, but let's focus on the positive.
Yeah.
We've also talked about some pretty exciting opportunities that could really make organograms take off. What are some of those things that investors should be excited about?
Well, there's still a lot of room for them to grow in Canada. They're already the leader, but as the industry matures and some of the weaker companies struggle, Organigram is in a great position to become even more dominant.
Survival of the fittest and organograms at the top of the food chain. I like it. But what about beyond Canada? We've touched on their global ambitions, but are those realistic?
They're already making moves internationally. They're exporting cannabis for medical use to places like Israel and Australia. But their main focus is Europe, especially Germany. They're really close to legalizing recreational cannabis there. If that happens, it could be huge for Organigram. They've got the know-how and the brands to do really well in a new market like that.
Germany going legal would be massive for the whole industry. But let's not forget about the U.S. What's their strategy for breaking into that market?
They're being careful, which makes sense given all the legal complexities in the U.S., but they haven't ruled it out. And their partnership with BAT could be a big help if they decide to go for it. BAT really knows the U.S. market and could help Organigram figure out the regulations and get a foothold there.
So they're waiting for the right moment, but they've got a plan ready if the opportunity comes up. Smart. Let's step back for a second and think about the bigger picture. Where does Organigram fit in with all the other Canadian cannabis companies? Who are their biggest rivals in this fight to be number one?
They're definitely at the top, no doubt about it. But they've got competition. There are established players like Tilray, Canopy Growth, and Aurora Cannabis.
So it's a crowded field. What makes Organigram different? What are their strengths that give them an edge?
We've already talked about their strong financials and their diverse brands,
Yeah.
but they have a couple of other things going for them. One, they're really focused on the Canadian market. That lets them be more flexible and adapt to what consumers want.
So they're not trying to do too much at once. They're mastering their home turf first. What else?
Their partnership with BAT is a big one. It gives them a real advantage in terms of R&D, understanding consumers, and expanding internationally. And they've got a strong leadership team, people who have a history of getting things done.
So they've got the money, the focus, a powerful partner, and experienced leadership. That's a pretty good combo. But even the best companies have their weaknesses, right? What are some things that Organigram could improve on, or maybe some potential challenges they're facing?
One thing that could be a weakness is that they rely so much on the Canadian market. Yeah, they're the leader there, but compared to the global cannabis market, Canada is pretty small.
So they're a big fish in a small pond. Could limit how much they can grow in the long run. Anything else?
Well, they're also pretty exposed to the lower end of the market, the value segment. It's super competitive there, and there's always a risk of price wars.
So they got to be careful not to get stuck in a race to the bottom on price.
Exactly. They need to keep finding ways to be different, build strong brands, and focus on those higher margin products.
So always room for improvement, even for a company like Organigram. Okay, before we move on, I want to get your overall take on whether or not to invest in them. Would you recommend Organigram stock to a friend?
That's a tough one. It really depends on the person, their situation, and how much risk they're comfortable with. But I can say this, Organigram has a lot going for it. They've got a good track record, they're financially solid, they have a clear vision for the future, and a unique partnership with a global player.
But it's not a sure thing, right?
No, definitely not. Cannabis is still unpredictable. There are always risks involved.
Okay, so it could be a really good investment, but not without risks. I think we've given everyone a lot to think about already. But before we jump to conclusions, there's one more thing we need to explore: their mergers and acquisition strategy. That's how they became the powerhouse they are today.
Oh yeah, that's a story you won't want to miss. We'll dive into all that in part 2 of our deep dive into Organigram.
Stay tuned. All right, welcome back for round 2 of our deep dive into Organigram. We talked about their crazy journey from tiny medical cannabis provider to a market leader. But like we mentioned, there's more to the story. We got to talk about their whole mergers and acquisitions thing.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Organigram hasn't just grown on its own. They've been really picky about which companies they buy, which has helped them grow even faster and reach more of the market.
Okay, so let's go through those acquisitions one by one. I know they made a few. What I'm curious about is how they decided who to buy. Did they just go on a spending spree, or was there like a plan?
They were super strategic about it. Every acquisition had a purpose. Like maybe they needed to add something to their product lineup, get access to new technology, or just become stronger in a particular market.
So more like putting together a puzzle than just like random shopping. Can you give us some examples? Let's start with the Edibles and Infusions Corporation, or EIC, back in 2021. I'm all ears, especially if gummies are involved.
Ah, yes, the gummies. EIC was all about edibles, and they were known for making really good, consistent cannabis-infused gummies. Now, you might think, gummies? Is that really that important?
Well, honestly, my first thought was just, ooh, gummies. But I'm definitely interested to hear how this was a strategic move.
Think about it. The edibles market is growing like crazy, and gummies are a big part of that, especially for people who are new to cannabis and maybe don't want to smoke or vape. So by buying EIC, Organigram jumped right into this trend and got a foothold in a market with huge potential.
Makes sense. They're thinking about people who want a different kind of cannabis experience. But then there's their acquisition of Laurentian Organic, also in 2021. That one sounded a bit more, what's the word, fancy.
Laurentian Organic was totally different. They were all about that craft cannabis, that premium hashish, especially that Afghan-style hash, which is super popular. This acquisition was about appealing to those high-end customers, the connoisseurs who want those really special artisanal products.
Like the difference between buying a regular beer and like a craft beer. One's for everyone, the other is for people who are really into the taste and experience. Organigram's got both ends covered.
Yep, exactly. And it also gave them a stronger presence in Quebec, which is a big market for cannabis in Canada. But their biggest move, like you mentioned earlier, was Motif Labs in 2024. That was a game changer.
Motif Labs, the one with the giant extraction and processing center. What made that acquisition so important? Why was that the big turning point?
Motif Labs gave Organigram something they really needed: the ability to extract on a massive scale. This meant they could start making those high-margin products you mentioned, the vapes, the edibles, the concentrates, but in huge quantities. And remember, those products are where the real money is in the cannabis industry. That's where the growth is happening.
So they weren't just buying companies. They were buying the skills and technology that would have taken them years to develop on their own, like a fast track to
You
success.
got it. And with Motif Labs, they didn't just become a producer, they got into the business of extraction. So they can actually provide extraction and product development services to other cannabis companies.
Pretty smart, right? So they're not just competing with other brands, they're actually supplying them too. It's like those people who sold picks and shovels during the gold rush. But acquiring a company is one thing. Making it work within your own company, that's a whole other challenge. How has Organigram handled that? Any bumps along the way?
This is where their experience and management skills really show. They've been incredibly successful at integrating their acquisitions. They keep the important people and expertise, and they use their national distribution network to get those new products out there quickly.
So they're not just buying these companies and then forgetting about them. They're taking what those companies know and making it a core part of their business. But let's talk about growth that's not about acquisitions. New products, new markets, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Are they only relying on acquisitions to grow?
Not at all. They're putting a lot of money into research and development, exploring totally new types of products, and really pushing the boundaries of what's possible with cannabis. Remember their partnership with BAT, they get access to some really top-notch R&D through that.
All right, BAT, the tobacco giant. So they're not just sitting back and counting on their acquisitions. They're being innovative, thinking about the future. What about expanding outside of Canada? We've talked about their global dreams, but what's the plan? The world is a big place, and the cannabis industry is different everywhere you go.
They're taking a careful step-by-step approach. They're already exporting medical cannabis to places like Israel and Australia, but Europe is their main focus right now. Germany's really close to legalizing recreational cannabis, and that could be a huge opportunity for Organigram.
I get why they'd be excited about Germany. Big economy, lots of people. But Europe's complicated. Every country has its own rules. How are they handling that?
Being strategic. They're targeting markets where the regulations are good for cannabis companies, and they're partnering with local companies who know how things work in those specific markets.
So they're not trying to barge in and do things their way. They're building relationships and adapting to how each country does things. There's one market we haven't talked about yet, the one that's on everyone's mind. The United States. What's their plan for getting into the U.S. market?
That's the big question, right? And the answer is they're waiting and watching. The U.S. is a tough market. It's a mix of legal states and then federal prohibition, which makes things tricky.
High risk, high reward.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling that BT partnership could be a huge help if they do decide to go for it.
Absolutely. D. Davis knows how to operate in the U.S. They've got experience with U.S. regulations, they know American consumers, and they already have a huge distribution network set up there.
It's like having an experienced guide to help them through the U.S. cannabis jungle. But even with the best guide, it's still risky. Okay, we've covered acquisitions, global expansion, new product development. Sounds like they have a solid plan for growth. But a plan is only as good as the people carrying it out. Right. Let's talk about Organigram's leadership and how they run the company. What can you tell us about the people in charge?
They have a really strong leadership team. Some of them are cannabis industry veterans, and then there are others who have experience in other areas like consumer packaged goods. It's a good mix of passion and practicality.
Okay, tell us about the main players. Who's running the show?
The CEO is Bina Goldenberg. She's been a big reason for their careful growth, their focus on running things efficiently, and their commitment to innovation. She came on board in 2021. She had tons of experience from the consumer goods world, which has been super helpful in the competitive cannabis market.
So she's got the experience and the vision to lead them in this ever-changing industry. Who else is on the leadership team?
You've got Peter Amaralt. He's the executive chairman of the board. He's the one providing guidance and making sure everything's running smoothly. And then in early 2024, they brought in Greg Guyat as their new CFO. He's a real expert in the cannabis world with a great track record in managing finances.
So it's a good blend of leadership experience and industry knowledge at the top. But what about their board of directors? Are they just there to rubber stamp whatever management wants, or do they actually hold them accountable?
Their board is pretty diverse. You've got industry experts, financial pros, and even people from BET. And they're independent, so they're not just going along with whatever management says. Having BAT on the board makes sure everyone's interests are aligned, and they bring a valuable global perspective.
That's good to know. It's important to have different viewpoints and voices to make sure they're making good decisions. But what about other major shareholders? Who are the key players with a stake in Organigram's success besides BET?
Well, besides BOT, you've got a mix of institutional investors. There are cannabis-focused funds, Canadian small-cap funds, and then a bunch of different ETFs, those exchange-traded funds. And some of the shares are owned by company insiders and management, which means their interests are aligned with other shareholders.
So a diverse group of investors, which is usually a good thing. But what about their overall approach to corporate governance? Are they transparent, accountable, and focused on making money for their shareholders?
They've been very open about their operations, how they're doing financially, and their plans for the future. They have clear rules about ethical behavior, how they report their financials, and how they manage risk. From what I've seen, they're doing a good job when it comes to corporate governance.
Transparency and accountability, that's super important, especially in an industry that's still trying to figure things out and earn the trust of investors.
Yeah.
But beyond the numbers and regulations, what about their commitment to sustainability? Are they just chasing profits, or are they trying to be environmentally and socially responsible?
They've been pretty vocal about being committed to sustainability. They've got initiatives to reduce their environmental impact, they're promoting responsible cannabis use, and they're supporting their local communities. It's not just talk. They're actually taking steps to do business the right way.
I like to hear that. Customers are really starting to demand that companies act responsibly, and it sounds like Organigram is taking that seriously. But let's be real, they're operating in a super competitive and unpredictable industry.
Absolutely. We've already talked about some of the risks: prices getting squeezed, regulations changing, the black market, and the challenges of going global.
So even with great leadership, a good growth strategy, and a commitment to sustainability, there are still obstacles to overcome. But after learning all this about Organigram, I'm feeling pretty optimistic about their chances. They seem to have a solid plan, a talented team, and the resources to deal with those challenges.
I agree. They're definitely a company to keep an eye on.
But like with any investment, it's crucial to do your homework, understand the risks and rewards, and make smart decisions based on your own situation and goals. Speaking of which, let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll wrap up our deep dive into Organigram with a final look at their investment potential and some key takeaways for you to consider.
Stick around.
All right, we're back for the final part of our Organigram deep dive. We've covered a lot, from their humble beginnings to their big plans for global domination. But now, the big question. Is Organigram a good investment?
Well, that's what we're trying to help you figure out. We've looked at their history, their strategies, their financials, even their leadership. Now let's put it all together and see what it tells us about investing in them.
Sounds good. Remind me, what were those key things that made Organigram stand out? The things that made me think, hey, this could be a winner.
Their financial strength, for one. It's really impressive. They've got a ton of cash on hand, over 100 million Canadian dollars, and they're practically debt-free. That's a huge advantage in an industry that usually needs a lot of capital. They can chase new opportunities, invest in research, and even ride out tough times in the market without having to scramble for money.
Yeah, that financial stability, that's a big deal. It's like they've got a safety net that most cannabis companies would love to have. What else stood out to you?
Their brand portfolio is another big strength. They've done a really good job of creating brands that people recognize and trust, and they've got something for everyone. Premium cannabis, value edibles, you name it. That diversification helps them capture a bigger part of the market and means they're not relying on just one product or type of customer.
So they're not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Oh.
But what about that partnership with British American Tobacco? That's a pretty unusual move.
That's what makes it so interesting. BAT brings more to the table than just money. They have a ton of experience in global markets, they understand consumers, and they've got a lot of research and development capabilities. Don't forget, BAT has been dealing with tough regulations and building successful brands for decades. That experience is super valuable for a cannabis company that wants to go global.
It's like they've got a mentor who's already been there and done that on a global scale. But let's be real, there are always risks.
Of course. Every investment has some risk, and cannabis industry is still pretty new and can be volatile. We talked about the competition, the changing regulations, and the black market, which is always a problem.
And even though Organigram's profitability is getting better, they're not consistently making money yet. The market could shift, something unexpected could happen, and then there are those darn excise taxes that the Canadian government keeps hitting them with. So it's not a sure bet, but it's not a company to ignore either.
Exactly. It's a high-growth, high-reward opportunity, but you got to be smart about it. Do your research, understand the risks, and make sure it fits with your investment goals and how much risk you're comfortable with.
Speaking of research, what are the analysts saying about Organigram's stock? Are they optimistic, pessimistic, or somewhere in between?
The general feeling is cautious optimism. A lot of analysts think the stock is undervalued right now, which means it could go up significantly. But analysts can be wrong, so it's always best to do your own homework before investing.
So don't just take their word for it. Look at the numbers, do some digging, and form your own opinion. But if the analysts are right and the stock is undervalued, what could make Organigram's stock price go up in the future?
If they keep improving their financials, especially their profitability and cash flow, that would be huge. Investors love to see consistent growth and a clear path to making money.
So good earnings reports, a healthy bottom line, that would be a positive sign for the market. What else could boost their stock?
Positive developments in the Canadian cannabis market would definitely help Organigram. Things like looser regulations, the government cracking down on the black market, or just more people buying cannabis. All of that would create a better environment for companies like Organigram.
And don't forget about their plans to expand internationally. If they can break into new markets, especially in Europe where there's a lot of potential for growth, that could be a major boost to their revenue and profits.
And then there's the U.S. It's the big unknown. Nobody knows for sure when or even if cannabis will be legal at the federal level. But if it happens, it would be a massive opportunity for Organigram. They could use that partnership with BAT to get into the biggest cannabis market in the world.
So lots of things could make their stock go up. But what about the other side? What could hurt their performance?
More competition in Canada, for sure. New companies entering the market, existing companies getting more aggressive, that could all put pressure on Organigram's market share and what they can charge for their products.
It's a tough business. They can't afford to sit back and relax. Anything else investors should watch out for?
Unfavorable changes to regulations. Things like stricter rules for marketing or higher taxes, that could hit their profits pretty hard.
And we can't forget about the black market. If the government doesn't do something about illegal cannabis operations, those illegal operators will keep undercutting the legal industry and hold back its growth.
Yeah, it's an ongoing battle, and one that Organigram and other legal cannabis companies have to keep fighting. And one more thing, even though the partnership with Beatty is a big plus, remember, Beatty is a tobacco company. Some investors and consumers might not like that, especially those who have ethical concerns about the tobacco industry.
So, a potential PR headache for them. Okay, I think we've covered pretty much everything, but before we wrap things up, I'm curious about your overall thoughts on the Canadian cannabis industry. Do you see it as a good long-term investment?
I'd say I'm cautiously optimistic. The industry has had its ups and downs, but it's also been pretty resilient. I think there's a lot of potential for growth in the long run, especially as more countries legalize cannabis and people become more comfortable with it.
But it's not a quick way to get rich, right?
No, definitely not. It's a long game. Investors need to be patient, do their research, and be prepared for some bumps along the way.
Solid advice for any investor, no matter what industry they're looking at. Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about. We've talked about Organigram's strengths, their weaknesses, their opportunities, and the risks they face. They're a really interesting company, and their story shows just how dynamic and unpredictable the cannabis world is.
It's been great diving deep with you.
As always, we encourage you to do your own research, talk to a financial advisor if you need to, and make investment decisions that make sense for you and your goals.
And remember, this deep dive was just the beginning. There's always more to learn, more to explore, and more to discover.
So stay curious, stay informed, and as always, keep on diving deep.